When a black woman is denied service at an exclusive restaurant, the staff has no idea who they just turned away. The rain lashed against the glass windows of Lucille Blue, its rhythmic drumming drowned out by the low murmur of elegant conversation inside. The restaurant was a temple of exclusivity, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over linen-draped tables, silverware gleaming under the careful flicker of candlelight. The kind of place where power dined, where privilege was served on polished plates. Micheline Carter stepped inside, shaking the rain from her coat, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She exuded quiet confidence, her posture impeccable, her presence commanding in an understated way. But the dampness in her clothes made her all too aware of the stares shifting toward her. A black woman, alone, entering a space that subtly signaled who belonged and who did not. She walked to the host's stand, pulling up the reservation confirmation on her phone. Micheline Carter, party of 1. 8 o'clock. The maitre d', a thin, impeccably groomed man with an air of detached superiority, barely glanced at the screen before returning to his tablet. His polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, but we don't seem to have your reservation." His voice was smooth, dismissive, rehearsed. Micheline frowned slightly. "That's not possible. I booked 2 weeks ago." "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do," he said, looking past her. "And unfortunately, we're fully booked tonight." Before Micheline could respond, the doors opened behind her, letting in a crisp gust of wind. A white couple entered, shaking off their umbrellas. The man, dressed in a tailored navy suit, walked to the host's stand with a casual ease. "Good evening. Do you have a table available?" he asked. The maitre d's demeanor shifted instantly. His polite indifference melted into warm hospitality. "Of course, sir. Right this way." Without even checking the tablet, he motioned for a waiter to lead them inside. Micheline's grip on her phone tightened, her stomach twisting. Not with surprise, but with exhaustion. She had seen this before, felt this before. That quiet, insidious kind of exclusion that never needed to be explicitly stated. It was always in the glance, the slight hesitation, the way doors remained closed to her while swinging open for others. She inhaled sharply. "I'd like to speak to the manager." The maitre d' sighed as if indulging a stubborn child. "The manager is unavailable right now." Micheline smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's interesting, because I saw him on my way in." He stiffened slightly. "I assure you, madam, there's nothing else to discuss. Perhaps you could try again another night? With a proper reservation." Her jaw tightened. The restaurant hummed around her, diners stealing glances, some feigning disinterest while others watched with curiosity. Micheline felt the weight of their eyes, the silent judgment, the unspoken question of whether she would leave quietly, whether she would accept what was happening. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her voice steady, deliberate. "Tell Chef Antoine Dupont that Micheline Carter is here." The maitre d's expression flickered for the first time. A shadow of confusion crossed his face, followed by the slow bloom of realization. "I don't think Chef Dupont." "Tell him," she interrupted, her voice like a blade, "that the woman who beat him at the International Culinary Prix 3 years ago is standing in his restaurant. Tell him that the youngest black woman to ever earn a Michelin star is being denied service at his establishment." A murmur spread through the nearest tables like a slow-burning fuse. The maitre d' swallowed hard. His arrogance, so solid just moments ago, now crumbled under the weight of her words. His fingers fumbled as he reached for his earpiece, his face paling as he hurriedly excused himself. Micheline didn't move. She stood tall, unshaken, as the room around her shifted. Then, from the far side of the restaurant, the kitchen doors swung open. The kitchen doors burst open with a force that sent a ripple of attention through the restaurant. Out stepped Chef Antoine Dupont, his tall frame moving with a confidence that came from years of commanding some of the finest kitchens in the world. His pristine white chef's coat was immaculately pressed, a streak of saffron-colored sauce the only evidence of his work that evening. He locked eyes with Micheline, and for a split second, a flicker of something, shock, maybe even fear, crossed his face before he quickly masked it with his usual arrogance. "Micheline Carter," he said, his accented voice even but tight. What an unexpected surprise. Micheline didn't miss the slight hesitation before the last word. She could see it now, the calculations running through his mind. The maitre d', now pale and visibly nervous, stood awkwardly beside him, waiting for guidance. "It seems your staff had trouble locating my reservation," Micheline said smoothly, tilting her head slightly. "But I suppose that's not surprising." A hush had settled over the restaurant. Diners leaned in, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Some recognized Micheline's name now, whispering amongst themselves. Micheline Carter. Soleil. Michelin-starred. The pieces were clicking into place. Antoine forced a tight smile. "A misunderstanding, I'm sure." He turned sharply to the maitre d'. "Find Ms. Carter the best table in the house." Immediately, the maitre d' nodded frantically, all arrogance gone, and motioned for a waiter to prepare a prime seat in the center of the dining floor. Micheline took her time as she walked to her table, shoulders back, gaze unwavering. As she passed, she noticed the young black busboy near the back of the restaurant. His eyes wide with something that looked like admiration, and something deeper, something she recognized. Recognition. She knew that look because she had worn it before. When she was young, when she was still fighting for her first job in a world that rarely opened its doors to people like her. She held his gaze for a beat, just long enough to let him know she saw him, that she understood. As she took her seat, she felt the atmosphere in the room shift. Conversations picked up again, but now with an edge of intrigue. Some diners nodded approvingly in her direction. Others, older, wealthier patrons, looked uncomfortable. She could see it in their expressions. They didn't like the reminder that status wasn't just about wealth. That power could be earned, not just inherited. A waiter approached, his hands slightly trembling as he set down a menu. "Chef Dupont would like to personally prepare a special tasting menu for you tonight, Ms. Carter," he said cautiously. Micheline offered a small, knowing smile. Of course, he would. She nodded. "Tell him I'd love to see what he's been working on lately." As the waiter scurried away, Micheline took in her surroundings. Every table now seemed hyper-aware of her presence. She could feel eyes darting in her direction, subtle and not-so-subtle glances. Some patrons whispered, while others openly stared. She had spent years perfecting the art of being seen without reacting. Let them watch. Let them talk. The first course arrived, a delicate amuse-bouche, plated meticulously. She took a bite, letting the flavors settle on her tongue. Good, but missing something. She wouldn't say anything. Not yet. As the courses continued, Micheline noticed a pattern. Each dish was exquisite, precisely executed. But there was something off about Antoine's flavors. Something lacking. It wasn't just the food. It was in the way the servers moved, the stiffness of the staff. This restaurant, his restaurant, wasn't thriving. And then it clicked. Antoine had plateaued. He had spent years perfecting his reputation, but somewhere along the way he had stopped evolving. He had stopped innovating. His dishes were textbook, technically flawless, but soulless. They didn't move people. She took another bite of his signature bouillabaisse reduction. And there it was. The thing she couldn't quite put her finger on before. A missing layer. A depth that wasn't there. She set her spoon down slowly. This wasn't just a night out. This wasn't just a power play. This was research. 3 courses in, Chef Dupont himself emerged from the kitchen again. This time he moved slower. He had seen her tasting, analyzing, not reacting. That worried him. "Tell me, Micheline," he said, forcing a smile. "Are you enjoying your meal?" She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "It's impressive," she said, her voice smooth. "Technically perfect." His smile faltered just slightly. "But something's missing," she added lightly, dabbing her napkin against her lips. Antoine stiffened. He wanted to argue, she could see it in his eyes. But he couldn't, not without proving her right. Micheline simply leaned back in her chair, a slow, knowing smile forming. She had everything she needed. She could see it already, the headlines, the buzz, the shift that was about to happen in the New York culinary scene. Because in exactly 3 weeks, she would be opening her own restaurant, directly across the street. 3 weeks later, the street outside Lucille Bleu was unrecognizably transformed. Across from its grand entrance, a sleek new sign now commanded attention. Soleil, by Michelin-starred chef Micheline Carter. The grand opening of Michelin's restaurant had ignited a firestorm of anticipation. The press was buzzing. Food critics speculated wildly about how Soleil would measure up against its rival. Reservations had sold out within hours. Inside Lucille Bleu, Chef Antoine Dupont sat at his private chef's table, his fingers steepled as he stared through the wide glass windows at the growing crowd across the street. It wasn't just a busy night over there. It was a movement. He could see photographers flashing, reporters eager to catch glimpses of high-profile guests. His own dining room, though still full, had a different air, one of uncertainty. His patrons were murmuring, distracted. He felt it, the shift. A waiter approached, clearing his throat. "Chef, Ms. Carter has sent you this." He placed a small, elegant envelope on the table. Antoine picked it up slowly. Personal invitation. His name written in flawless script. He opened it, his pulse quickening. "Antoine, I want to thank you for the inspiration. That night at your restaurant changed everything for me, and will change everything for you, too. I finally identified what was missing from your bouillabaisse reduction. Come see what I've done with it." A slow chill crawled down Antoine's spine. What had she discovered? For years he had been at the top, untouchable. But now Micheline had turned the tables. She had his attention, his patrons' attention, the entire city's attention. And she had done it all without even needing to say his name. Across the street, Soleil was alive with energy, vibrance, and something Lucille Bleu had lost, soul. Micheline moved through the space, greeting guests with effortless confidence. Her signature golden chef's coat, a striking contrast to the muted tones of Antoine's traditional white. The restaurant gleamed, sleek, modern, yet undeniably warm, designed for everyone who had ever been made to feel unwelcome somewhere else. In the kitchen, her brigade of diverse, young chefs worked in perfect harmony. Their energy was electric, their passion undeniable. 5 minutes to service, one of her sous chefs called out, and Micheline smiled, stepping forward to plate the first dish of the night. Her reinvented bouillabaisse reduction, the very dish Antoine had struggled to perfect, was ready to make its debut. Outside, the press waited eagerly. But Micheline wasn't concerned with the headlines. She knew that after tonight, she wouldn't just be a competitor to Antoine Dupont. She would be the new standard. The night was in full swing at Soleil, and every plate that left the kitchen carried more than just food. It carried a message. Micheline moved with quiet authority, orchestrating her team like a conductor leading a symphony. The restaurant buzzed with energy, but she kept her focus razor-sharp. Every dish had to be perfect. Every guest had to feel seen. And then he walked in. Antoine Dupont. The moment his presence was noticed, a hush fell over parts of the dining room. A few diners turned, whispers spreading like wildfire. The press outside craned their necks, cameras flashing through the glass. Micheline didn't flinch. She had been expecting him. Antoine hesitated near the entrance, clearly uncomfortable. He had spent years towering over the industry, commanding spaces like they belonged to him. But here he wasn't in control. A hostess approached him with a polite smile. "Welcome to Soleil, Chef Dupont. Chef Carter has reserved a table for you. Right this way." Micheline watched from the kitchen as Antoine was led to a prime seat in the center of the room. She let the moment breathe, savoring the irony. 3 weeks ago, she was being denied service in his restaurant. Now she was hosting him in hers. The server arrived at Antoine's table with a single dish, her bouillabaisse reduction. Antoine stared at it for a moment, then exhaled slowly. He knew this was a challenge, but more than that, it was an invitation. He picked up his spoon, scooped up a taste, and brought it to his lips. The moment the broth touched his tongue, his expression shifted. It was everything he had tried to perfect, everything he had failed to achieve. Layers of depth, richness, balance. A missing piece he hadn't even realized was absent in his own cooking. And now it was in front of him, on her plate, in her restaurant. Micheline finally emerged from the kitchen, gliding toward his table with measured grace. She stopped just beside him, watching as he swallowed, processing everything. "Now do you see?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of struggle, rejection, and perseverance. Antoine placed his spoon down carefully. He looked up at her, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only realization. She didn't need his validation. She didn't need his approval, because this moment wasn't about him. It was about every young black chef who had been dismissed, every woman who had been overlooked, every person who had been told they didn't belong. Micheline had made sure that from now on they did, and there was nothing Antoine Dupont could do to stop it. Antoine sat motionless, the spoon resting beside his half-finished dish. The noise of the restaurant carried on around him. Laughter, clinking glasses, murmured conversations. But in his mind, there was only silence. Micheline stood beside him, waiting. Not for his approval, not for an apology, but for understanding. The reality was undeniable now. The culinary world he had ruled for so long had shifted, and she had been the one to shift it. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "It's brilliant." The words came slowly, like they were difficult to admit. "This is what I was missing." Micheline tilted her head slightly, studying him. "It always was," she replied simply. Antoine exhaled, pushing the plate back slightly. "I underestimated you." "You did," she agreed. "But you're not the first, and you won't be the last." There was no gloating in her voice, no arrogance, only certainty. She had nothing left to prove. Antoine glanced around the restaurant, truly seeing it for the first time. The energy, the diversity, the warmth. Everything Lucille Bleu had lost, Soleil had captured. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement. Slowly, he stood, nodding once in acknowledgement. "I suppose I'll have to see how this affects business," he murmured, a wry, almost self-deprecating smirk appearing. Micheline crossed her arms. "It's not just business that's changing, Antoine. It's everything." And she was right. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. "Soleil shines. Michelin-starred chef Micheline Carter opens the most anticipated restaurant of the year. Black excellence in fine dining. Carter's Soleil challenges New York's culinary elite. Antoine Dupont's era is over. Micheline Carter ushers in the future of fine dining." The industry had felt the shift. Chefs, critics, and young aspiring cooks now saw something that hadn't always been clear. The gatekeepers were losing their grip. Micheline sat in her office the next afternoon, scrolling through the messages flooding her inbox. Offers for interviews, invitations to global food conferences, a feature request from the New York Times. But the message that stopped her cold was a simple handwritten note. It was from a young black culinary student she had never met. "Chef Carter," it read, "I've spent my whole life being told that fine dining wasn't for people like me. Last night, you proved them all wrong. I just wanted to say, thank you." Micheline set the note down slowly, her chest tightening with emotion. This was why she had done it. Not for revenge, not for validation, but to change the game. She leaned back, exhaling as she gazed out the window. Across the street, Lucille Bleu was still standing, but it looked smaller now, because Soleil wasn't just another restaurant. It was the future. That evening, as the last guests filtered out of Soleil, Micheline stood by the kitchen doors, watching her staff. They were tired but beaming, their energy still electric from the night's success. She stepped forward, clapping her hands once to get their attention. "You did that," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Every single one of you. This isn't just my restaurant. It's ours. And this is just the beginning." A cheer erupted, and for the first time in years, Micheline felt something she had been too busy fighting for to acknowledge. She felt home. As she turned back toward the dining room, she caught sight of someone standing near the entrance. The young black busboy from Lucille Blue. He hesitated, clutching his apron in his hands, as if unsure if he should be here. Micheline tilted her head. "You thinking about working for a real chef?" she asked, a teasing smile playing at her lips. The young man's eyes widened. You'd hire me?" Micheline's expression softened. "I'm not offering you a job," she said. "I'm offering you a seat at the table." The boy blinked rapidly, trying to hold back his emotion. Then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion, but one that spoke volumes. Micheline gave him a single nod in return. "Be here at 5 tomorrow. We start early." As he stepped inside, the camera pulled back, capturing the glow of Soleil, the warmth of its lights, the history being rewritten in real time. And with that, Micheline Carter turned off the lights and locked the door to her restaurant.